Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome and happy holidays, whatever it is you happen to celebrate. ArcSys just put out the format for the Arc World Finals coming up in March, being held in South Korea. And as usual, I have some things to say about the format in question. So we're going to quickly go through what the new format is, and then afterwards I'm going to be giving my thoughts on each section and what has changed from last year to this year. So for gear and for Grand Blue Fantasy versus Rising, we can't say anything about Uni because unfortunately they did not get a full world tour like the others. I've already spoken many times on this particular issue. You can check out a video that I'll leave a link for in the description where I kind of air out my grievances on how Uni has been treated on the tour. But for Grand Blue and for Guilty Gear Strive, they are going by this format: 4 round robin groups of 4 players. First place in each group will advance to the winner's side. Top 2 of all second place finishers will advance to the loser sides for the first stage. So we already have a few things to talk about. Firstly, round robin pools are coming back, and I have spoken many times about how I don't like round robin pools with 4 players because there ends up being a lot of variance and a lot of tiebreakers. And I really thought that after last year's issue with Razzo, who ended up not qualifying for the next stage of the finals because she was 1% below the person above her, I thought they would distance themselves from this because the tiebreakers usually get pretty ugly, but nonetheless, they decided to bring them back. I'll leave a photo of how close it was last time. And it's really sad because Razzo was only 1-1 difference. Her game win to loss differential was the same, but because they're going by percentage instead of differential, she ended up not qualifying, which is an oversight for sure. And so, to my dismay, round robin groups are coming back. I would love to see them in the future experiment with some alternative formats like Swiss or even round robin where there are more players in the pools, because usually the more players that are in pools in round robin mitigate some of the variance. We see this with things like Capcom Cup. They do bigger ones, do 6. They've done 6-person round robin pools, and that cuts down the variance a lot outside of the actual method used to determine who was in what pool in the first place. But that's something completely separate. So round robin's back. First place in each group will advance to the winner's side, which is pretty normal given round robin. I don't have any issues with that. Totally fine. Here's where I have the biggest issue. I think this is maybe the worst rule on the entire format. Top 2 of all second place finishers will advance to the loser side. And at first glance, that might not seem very weird to you if you're not all that familiar with tournament formats, but you start to realize that this means that second place isn't enough to qualify for 2 of the 4 people. It's only top 2 of the second place finishers. So placing second does not guarantee you a spot in the final bracket, which I think is really bad. It's really bad to set kind of a milestone or a threshold where this is where you qualify, but then also say, no, only 2 of the 4 second placers are actually going to make it. I really think this is a huge oversight on their part to deprive the second placers, and placing second place in pools like this is not easy at all. We're talking about the world finals, the highest caliber of players. To place second place only to be knocked out of the tournament by what I assume will be arbitrary tiebreaker. I assume that they're gonna go by like percentage or something to determine who is top 2 of each one. But even if they play out tiebreakers, I still think it's not great. Let me put it this way. So you split the players into groups and you determine whether they advance or not based on their performance against other people within their group, right? What this does, even if they end up playing out tiebreakers, or in the case that they do it like I think they're going to, where they, compare scores to each other, what determines you making it to bracket or not is actually not solely your performance against your group, right? You have no control over the other second placer's win rate against other players that you didn't even get to play. If you were playing against the same pool of players, it would be one thing because you can compare directly, or at least more directly, but in this situation, your score is compared to someone in a completely separate group full of players that you never even got to interact with at all. And I think that really makes the decision fall flat in and of itself. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to establish group stage and then kind of subvert that by saying, oh, well, it's actually your comparison to completely separate group that ends up determining whether you make it to the finals or not. And so I think that this one rule actually makes this format kind of not great. I personally don't mind companies kind of trying to innovate and trying to find, new, inventive, interesting formats for World Finals. I mean, after all, it is the World Finals. It's supposed to be like kind of the shining star of your game, and it's supposed to be like kind of a showcase of how cool and exciting the games can be and the players can be. But whenever that takes precedent over fairness to the players, which I think competitive integrity is kind of being undermined here by the format, that's when we have an issue, right? And so I really, really think that this rule is bad. Ideally, in a perfect world, I would love to see it changed. Do I think it will change when it comes down to it? No, I don't think it will, but it is what it is. However, that is not the only part of the ARC World Finals that I take issue with. So the next section, we're going to be talking about the LCQ. The LCQ is going to be held on day 2, and there is something different here than previous years as well. So as you can see, top 2 of the LCQ will advance. We actually knew about this ahead of time, that there would be 2 qualifiers instead of 1, which I think is a fine change. Absolutely. I will say that I hope that they play out grand finals nonetheless, just because, it kind of feels anticlimactic to have this amazing LCQ tournament and then not give people the grand finals to close out, just for entertainment's sake. Let them play it out, because it's just dope that way. But the biggest issue with the LCQ this year is actually the kind of the asterisk below it, where it says players eliminated in the first stage may enter. That means if you're someone that qualified for World Finals and you place, honestly, up to second, if you place 3rd and 4th guaranteed, if you're 2 of the 4 people that lose on the tiebreakers to the other second placers, you can enter the LCQ. And I actually think that this is kind of an iffy rule for me. I've talked to a few different players and a few different people in the community, and reactions are kind of mixed to this rule. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I'm personally on the side of not liking it, and the reason is that the way that I see it, the players that are most likely to qualify and win the LCQ are actually exactly those players that did not qualify via group stage, right? They get knocked out of the tournament in groups, and I think they are the best position to win the LCQ, because most of the people that have qualified for the World Finals are major winners already, or they're consistent high placers that have traveled around the world and racked up points in order to qualify. And so in a way, I think that this LCQ really has the issue of the most likely outcome there being one or maybe even both players that qualify out of LCQ being players that we already saw in group stage, right? And it kind of deprives those who are traveling to LCQ for that actual last chance and giving it to those who did not perform in groups, which kind of undermines the idea of having a group stage in the first place, right? Because you underperform, there's no actual eliminations being had in group stage, because they all get to enter the LCQ for another chance to qualify. And I just don't feel like that is appropriate, given that you're depriving 2 second placers in groups of their spot in the bracket to do this, right? I think those things in tandem kind of really make the format not good. It is also worth noting that winning or placing second place in the LCQ puts you directly to the final bracket, right? So you skip the group stage, because obviously the LCQ happens after group stage. And I think I have an issue with that as well, because that means that even if you qualify out of LCQ and you just lose your first match, you still outplace the people that qualified into groups and then didn't qualify out, right? Like if you get 3rd place or you get 4th place or perhaps even 2nd place in groups, right? You get outplaced by the 2 LCQ winners. And I feel like that, again, kind of undermines the idea of the group stage and everything in the first place, because the LCQ players don't need to go through groups. And I think that is oversight. I think that it makes a lot of sense for LCQ players to still have to play in groups. All this does is create a dynamic where the best strategy for this year's tour would have been to not even spend any money traveling around to tournaments to qualify and just win the LCQ. If you're that caliber of player that can win a major, right? the best strategy was actually just to qualify out of LCQ because you don't have to even go through groups if you win LCQ, and you don't even have to win either, right? Like you can play second place and just skip groups entirely. So I think that is also an issue with the last chance qualifier. The last stage on day 3, double elimination bracket, 4 winners and 4 losers. This is business as usual. Can't really mess this one up, so don't really have much to say about that. But we're going to be moving on to the next section, which is talking about the draft. So the draft is returning for this year's World Tour, and I have a little bit of speculation onto how this will work this time around, but we won't really know 100% for sure until we actually get there. So group selection. Group draft order is determined by AWT ranking. Players then select their group based on draft order. So how I think this will work is the platinum qualifiers are going to choose last. The 8 platinum qualifiers are going to choose down here. And those who qualified via points from, gold, silvers, and plats will be picking first, right? So the ones with the lowest point totals that qualified will be earlier on so that they have to pick with less information. And those who have more points will be picking later in the order so they can see kind of who's in the polls before they choose where to go, right? So my main issue with this particular format for the draft is kind of how it was communicated beforehand, because I personally know a few different players that believe that their point placement was going to directly affect their seeding, right? And so we have players that are already qualified or have been safe on the points leaderboard for a while that are still going to events and kind of gatekeeping because they believe that their point standing will actually make a significant difference in where they are in the bracket. Risk, Rumble, and SoCal this year, the top 2 placers of that event were already platinum qualified Koji Coco and Zane, who was already safe via points, having the most points on the leaderboard. And so the amount of points that was actually doled out at that event to those that need them to qualify was very little. It's somewhere in the 40s, right? Where it should be, well over 100, close to 200. And I think that that is a direct result of kind of how unclear they were telling the players on how this would impact their standing at the beginning of the tour. For all intents and purposes, I think that if they are prioritizing the platinum players and letting them all go last and the point qualifiers are all first, then pretty much no matter what, if you qualified via points, your draft seeding is kind of random, so to speak, because you're going into a pool that's going to have either one player or no players in it already, right? Depending on if you're picking in the first row or the second row. The platinum players, on the other hand, are going to have 2 players in each pool already before they get to choose, right? And so they're going to have a lot more information. So for them, I think it matters way more than the point qualifiers who kind of are, shot in the dark. You can maybe avoid one particular player or matchup that you don't, but there are still 2 more players that are going to be joining your pool after you, and you have no control over that. So that is kind of what I mean by you don't have enough information for it to really impact in a huge way. I think it impacts a little bit, but not a ton. And I think that should have been communicated, because if it was, then I think we would have had less instances of players, kind of gatekeeping. And there was a lot of gatekeeping this tour, by the way. It's actually way more than you think it is. Moving down to the next section, we have group ranking and tiebreaker. So they're going off of win-loss record. That's business as usual. They're talking about sets here. And then they're talking about game score difference for number 2. So this actually, I will give them credit. This is a change based on that Razzo situation that I talked about earlier, where instead of going by the percentage, your win-loss percentage, which is very inconsistent and kind of arbitrary, they're going by game score difference. So even if your difference, if you have the same game score differential, if you won one more but also lost one more than your opponent, you're tied, right? Instead of one of them being chosen as the winner based on kind of the arbitrary percentage. So I will commend them for making that change. I think that is a direct response to the Razzo situation from last year, so good on them for that. The third bullet point here, we have head-to-head result for 2-way ties and game win rate for 3-way ties. And I feel like this is maybe overcomplicating things a little bit. Ideally, you would just have, one governing rule that applies to all situations, but they decided to split it into 2 different situations, where if it's 2 people tied, then you take the head-to-head, and if it is a 3-way tie, then you go by percentage. And that's probably because they don't want to play multiple tiebreakers, because if 3 people tie, then you have to play 3 sets to do tiebreakers, right? But that being said, they also say if a tie persists after all of the criteria, the additional BO1 match will decide the final ranking. And so I really don't like World Finals obsession with BO1s. I think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have an entire World Tour on a certain format. We don't know what the finals format, we don't know if groups are going to be first to 3. We don't know if groups are going to be first to 2, but either way, we know that it's not going to be BO1. And so to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have a tiebreaker. Tiebreakers are very, very important because it literally determines make it or break it to qualify or not. But to have that on a different format than what has been played the entire time, I think is kind of silly. I wish they would have kept the same format. If you're going to do the extra, last chance tiebreaker, then at least make it the same set length than the actual set themselves. Obviously, this was probably done because of time, production purposes. They don't want things to take too long if we get into a situation where there's a whole bunch of tiebreakers. But I do think that the difference here would not be that significant, and it does make a huge difference to how players feel about tiebreakers and how it is decided who qualifies and who doesn't. So I would have liked to see that change as well. And then last and least, unfortunately, we have the advancement to day 3, where we talked about it before. First place going directly into the winner's side, and then loser's side, they're going to choose 2 of the second places to qualify, which is, again, I think the worst rule on this entire format. So overall, this World Finals format feels in some ways experimental, where they're like trying to step out of their comfort zone and trying to like try new things and try to be innovative in some ways. But in doing so, they've kind of, in a way, like tried to reinvent the wheel, where I think they have overcomplicated things. Some of the fairness of tournament play has kind of been undermined by them just trying to be quirky and new. And try to bring something new to the table. So unfortunately, I feel like this format is worse than last year by a pretty significant margin. That being said, I think the matches will still be entertaining. I think we'll still have a good time watching the finals and everything. I just really feel for the players that feel like they get kind of screwed over by how weird and quirky the rules are. And that is pretty much it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the World Finals format for Arc World Tour 2025-2026. We will be doing watch party coverage on my channel at twitch.tv/Khalil_. I also stream various fighting game related things there every single day, and some variety thrown in. So if you're interested in hanging out and having a place for constructive discussion about fighting games and things like this, feel free to hop on over. We'd love to have you. Please leave a comment letting me know what you think about this year's World Final format and how you think it compares to some previous years. And whenever we have more information for another video, I'll be sure to get that out for you guys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time. Later.